I'm not saying I am an awesome at editing, but clearly I'll take out all the rubbish, usually that I'm going to say, and in order to, and then I'll explain a lot more of what it is I'm trying to do, and really just have a conversation with you, which is really what this is about.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. So look, I mean, what it is about really. So Second Wind and Second Wind Academy is something that myself and a couple of, I guess, partners have been ruminating on for ages. And we really took the step to go out and launch something, or begin that launch, back in November last year. And with that, since then, we've been really building out what we see as a platform. And the purpose of this platform is to help, is to really bring to life this process of transition that elite athletes go through, from being in the game and sort of on field, in the pool, in the middle, on track, through to that life beyond sport and what they do afterwards. And it's something I've gone through personally, and so many of my friends I've watched go through it as well, and help them along the path. And it's like, right, I think now's a good time to give back and actually try and create something that inspires, guides, and connects athletes to that new future for them.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. I love it. I think it is very timely, and I like, particularly coming off of the pandemic, where I feel like everyone has gone through this period of sort of reflection, and you have people quitting their corporate jobs because they realize they, don't want to go into the office, or they have this startup that they just decided they're going to pursue. And then you also have athletes and entrepreneurs who are, reflecting and making transitions in the opposite direction, or any which way. And so I think, it's very timely in that regard. And I also feel like there's just a lot more awareness around how important soft skills and these like intangible skills are in a business career. And these are skills that I feel like athletes have just built such strong foundations in, because it's like essential to be able to compete at a high level and execute the training day in, day out that's needed to do that. And so I think it's a cool time where people are starting to have more awareness around this like new area of strength that historically hadn't necessarily been connected to, business or government or just the world outside of sport,
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And I love, just there you're mentioning that soft skills and that appreciation in terms of what that means. And this whole COVID pandemic that the world has all gone through together has really highlighted that, and really highlighted that focus on skills and this move to digital and engagement. I think it's fantastic.
Yes.
Yeah,
totally.
And so that I'm super excited really to have you here right now and being able to have this conversation. And what I think is even more fascinating is, probably 2 years ago, so pre-COVID, setting this up would have been way more difficult. Whereas now it's very much a case of, hey, let's catch up, let's organize time zones, and we can have a chat.
Totally. I know. It's amazing. It's amazing even just to think back a few years. I mean, I even feel like I spent a lot of time long distance with my partner while I was doing triathlon. And we had a number of conversations where like the long distance would have been way more difficult than it already was, pre FaceTime or Zoom or Skype or whatnot. So agreed. There are a lot of positives to the new digital age that we're living in now.
Yeah, absolutely. And so look, so as part of this podcast, really, it's about us having a conversation. I know I mentioned really generally talking about 5 different things, understanding a bit of your story, and then understanding really through that the way a transition from elite sport came to be, happened, and then reflecting on that. And then we spend a bit of time really talking about you now and what's next and how that sort of really comes together. So really just to get us started, I'd love to know a bit about sort of you and what that story is, because it's an amazing story. So I'm going to prompt you if you don't go to where I want it to be. I will interject, but you go. You just tell me a bit about where you are and
Sure.
that story. Fantastic.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to. And I've had a lot of transitions in my life, that's for sure.
You have.
Yeah, so I guess not to take us back too far, but I feel like it's helpful context. So growing up, I was a competitive figure skater, and I think I also did a couple school sports in middle and beginning of high school. But skating was a really formative experience for me. I had a Russian coach who was just created this culture of extreme discipline and work ethic. And I feel like that really transcended beyond my skating training into, like how I manage my time and prioritizing my schoolwork and whatnot. And I think like I was fortunate in hindsight that my parents also really valued like my brother and myself having like a well-rounded experience. Like there were phases in my skating years when I was pushing them to let me be homeschooled because all of my competitors were homeschooled so they could have more time to train. And that was like, they never gave that request the time of day, much to my dismay at the time. But I think like in hindsight, having the education that I did and the sporting background have really come together, I think, to provide the platform for, what I'm doing today and, what I've been able to achieve in sport and out of sport. But I think for me, skating, it was a sport that I loved and I was pretty good at, but did not have the natural build for, like the ideal build of a figure skater is, you're really tall if you're 5'5", and I was 5'8" by the time I was in 6th grade. So I did not have the classic figure skater build. And I think for me, there was an element of just showing what could be achieved if you worked hard and had built a great environment and surround yourself with great people. And I think that is an important point to bring up early on, because it's a theme that I've found throughout all my experiences has been something that is a motivator for me to sort of defy expectations and to find people who are, like equally passionate, equally driven, and they believe that like great things can happen when you bring those elements together. But I guess, so when I graduate, and I guess I also started sort of a theme in my sporting career with skating, in that I decided to actually take a year off between high school and college to be able to pursue figure skating full time in a way that I, hadn't been able to when I was also, balancing school. And it was an amazing experience, like amazing opportunity to just focus full time on sport. And it was the first time I'd done that.
Yeah. Why did you do that?
So I think I guess a couple of reasons. The first was practically the figure skating competitive calendar is not aligned to the academic calendar in the US, such that our qualifying season that builds up to the national championships essentially starts in like October, which is like a month after our school starts. And I had gotten to the point by senior year that I was just on the verge of being able to compete at sort of like the national level and have a shot at qualifying for competition at that level. And so I don't even know who even made me aware that this was an option. But once I had accepted like my offer to attend Dartmouth College, at that point, I think it might have even been my parents, to be honest, who said, mentioned that this is an option that could be open to me. And it's because if I went to college, I would essentially just have to cut my season off without really being able to have any closure. So I think practically that's where that decision came from. But I think for me also had another level of, having that opportunity to really focus full time on something that I had a lot of success in. I knew it wasn't going to be I knew I wasn't going to the Olympics, but so it had those two elements. Yeah. And
so in that, and I'm curious because what were you hoping to achieve? Because there you were saying you knew you weren't going to go to the Olympics.
My goal was to qualify for the national championships, which in and of itself, I think was a goal that, I think would have been a big accomplishment for me at the time. It's one I ultimately fell short of, but I was able to qualify for basically the national qualifier. And I was the first person I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and was the first female figure skater in, I think, almost a decade to even get that far. So, and that was something that wouldn't have been possible if I hadn't taken that time. So I was ultimately glad that I was fortunate enough to be able to take that. Yeah.
Yeah. Great perspective, but yes. And again, a great achievement. So what was next?
Yeah, so next was college. As I mentioned, I attended Dartmouth, and Dartmouth is actually one of the handful of schools that has a figure skating club team. So that was something I was thinking about. Just skating was such a big part of my life, and I'd been in touch with the figure skating club team coaches. But also as I began school, I guess undergrad, I had this vision of being the NCAA, athlete, scholar athlete, if you will. And I had always enjoyed the team sports that I did growing up. And I felt like that was something that could really enhance my collegiate experience. So going into freshman fall, I was thinking about, what would be sports that I could potentially walk on to. And actually didn't necessarily have rowing on my radar. But as I got to campus, and I was actually standing in line to pick up my computer, because I guess we picked up computers in line at that point. And the freshman rowing coach was kind of going around looking for tall women who seemed like they had some kind of athletic build, I guess, right? Kind of fit that mold. So they approached me and asked if I had thought about rowing, and I hadn't really at that point, but they were having an information session in the first couple of weeks of school. So I figured, well, why not attend it and see? So, and from there, I think the sport was really compelling to me in the magic that in the video that they showed of, 9 women in a boat rowing through the fog at, 6 a.m., all moving and thinking as one. So I got wrapped up in just that romance of the sport, I guess.
Mhm. I love that. Even as you describe that vision, that video, you said things like 6 a.m. in the fog. Um, those bits would probably turn most people off anyway, irrespective of what it
Probably.
was. But you're there with the romance of it. Can you just explain what was you were looking for a spot that you could just walk on? What do you mean by that phrase?
Yeah, good question. In college, at least in the US, there are sort of two types of NCAA athletes. You have the recruited athletes who have already done the sport through high school and are specifically recruited by the coach to be a high performer on the team. And then there are also walk-on athletes. And these can be athletes who have done the sport, but maybe didn't necessarily have the specific split, or they just hadn't, gotten on the radar of the coaches to be recruited. Or it can be people like myself who hadn't done the sport and just walked on to the team, literally, and picked the sport up from scratch. And as you can imagine, oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, and so you fall into the category of never picked up an oar in your life or been on a rowing boat.
Yep, exactly.
I mean, which I think is fascinating, knowing what I do about the US collegiate system, Dartmouth College, and you figuring you could just walk into the rowing team. I have to ask, what gave you the right to do that?
Well, because I thought I could, I guess. I mean, I would say the rate of attrition in rowing was quite high freshman fall. I think we started with probably close to 40 women, and we were down to maybe 20, maybe 20, 25 by halfway through the year. And I think most of that was an element of rowing is a grueling sport. And, we did have the 6 a.m. practices regularly. And, understandably, there's a lot of people who don't want that to be their college experience. And then certainly there's an element of performance too. And I think for me, I loved the culture of the team. I certainly have a bit of a masochist in me. Like I just love to push myself. And I love to be around other people who love to do that. And so as I was, and I think there were two really big hurdles for me that fall. The first was, again, while I was too tall for skating, but then when it came to rowing, I was actually one of the shorter women on the team. I came in weighing 115 pounds and had to put on like a good bit of muscle weight to be able to really, propel the weight of a boat. So there was a lot of I would say physical transition, like my relationship with in terms of eating and my diet really had to change. So I had sort of this whole area of growth and transition. And then I also had just, picking up the technique of a whole new sport, which is very technique oriented on top of just, building fitness. And I think skating is also very technical. So fortunately, I think that was actually an area that I was able to call on, and just my ability to call on my physical self-awareness from dance and skating. And then that attention to detail that is actually really important in rowing as well.
Yeah, yeah. And so how was your, at some points we'll come back to that, but how was your rowing experience and what was that like? Well, I asked the obvious question, although I know the answer, but it'd be good to understand. So did you make the team? Did you keep doing it?
Yeah, yes, I did make the team. I went on to kind of grow with the team over the years, and then ended up actually being captain of the team my senior year, which was a huge honor. And while I majored in environmental studies with a focus in environmental economics. But my parents joke that I majored in rowing because it truly was a defining part of my Dartmouth experience. The rowing team was truly my family on campus. And I think just as in many sports, but particularly in rowing and up in New Hampshire, going through winter training together, you go through some low lows, and then in spring and fall racing, some other lows, but also just wonderful highs. Being able to win races by a matter of inches together is like a really exciting and magical experience. So it was, I would say, a really formative experience and big part of my time at Dartmouth.
Yeah, it is really formative listening to you, saying that those experiences that you have as a team, as a family, in fact, the way that you describe it there, and then being with you when at your low points, being with you at the high points, and winning. They're the types of things that stick with you, are they?
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, rowing, as a competitor, I'm always looking to win the race. But I think what is like most memorable for me when I look back on my rowing experience is just the bond that I built with the women on my team. And, especially each season, the boat I was on would be so close. I mean, you're spending so much time together, you're moving together. In rowing, you have a coxswain who steers the boat, but also will kind of like narrate to us particular moves, where the boats are compared to us, and we'll call out various cues or reminders as we're rowing. And the coxswain's voice, I felt like, would almost become like the voice in all of our minds. And so it was like a very powerful experience for me in terms of, seeing what's possible when people are truly, like on the same page, all like literally pulling for one another to try and achieve this goal together. So it was a special experience I'm grateful for.
Yeah, yes, it is a great focus. And so I guess after college, you majored in rowing, you had a minor in environmental science. But there's more, right?
There is. Turns out that was just the beginning. So as I mentioned, I had formally majored in environmental studies. And so after college, I moved to Washington, D.C., and I was working in environmental consulting, primarily working with federal agencies in the area of alternative fuel transportation, which was a pretty exciting time because it was right when sort of electric vehicles as we now know them were being rolled out, like the Nissan Leaf and Chevy Volt. And sustainability continues to be an area that I'm really passionate about, and I think has a lot of really interesting aspects in terms of how it impacts businesses and is bringing together new parties who had never worked together before. So I only make that little tangent because I think for me, like I think being an athlete is certainly a big part of who I am, but not the only part. And certainly having a career and making a contribution to the world, like bigger than myself, is really important. So I've always had this kind of parallel journey to sport, thinking about, you know, what do I want my broader impact to be? And where do I feel like I can make it? So that was certainly a great, I think, foundational experience. I had a really great team that I worked with there. And then outside of work, I had done a triathlon while I was at Dartmouth with a couple of friends, and had a fun time doing it, and thought maybe this is something that could be, you know, like just a hobby, or, you know, a way to like have an event to motivate me to exercise before going into the office every day when I graduate from college. And triathlon is quite popular in the DC area. And I didn't really know anyone in the city. So frankly, outside of work, triathlon just became a way for me to, you know, meet friends and get outside and stay active outside of my work.
Yeah. I mean, look, I would say, for me, I remember I moved to Australia, and I saw, okay, yeah, Australia, everyone does a triathlon in Australia. It's a great way for me to meet people. Okay. I found that not everybody does triathlons, but it was a great way to certainly meet people. And, you know, I think I mentioned it's something I, you know, swim slower in every time, basically, is what it feels like. But that was it. It was good. It's a great way for me to meet people and keep fit, and something I do on the side of work and family. Yeah, you know, that. Isn't that where
that was
most
all.
people
That was that was all it was meant to be for me as well. Yeah, certainly. And I think something that's so special about the triathlon community is, you know, I think there's such a welcoming culture. And to what you were saying, I mean, especially in the water, most people are just trying to get through the swim, frankly. And so there's a great camaraderie in the struggle, I think.
Yeah. I'm interested, like you say, there's that camaraderie that in and around the sport. For me, for myself personally, I think when I get out of the water, I'm always relieved for two things. One, I tend to, because I'm out of the water, and I'm like, wow, I made it. That means I can finish this triathlon. I can finish this now. And two, because I am so poor at swimming, I get out of the water relatively. I'm like, oh, hold on, I'm on land now. And most of the people I'm racing against, by the time I get out, I'm like, okay, I can catch them. So I tend to overtake a lot of people in that transition, which again feels really good. So I start to feel good about myself again there.
That's awesome. I love it.
So tell me then, so tell me about your triathlon experience and how you took what was enjoyable, what you seem to have a good sense about, into the next level.
Yeah, sure. So it was sort of an unexpected evolution of events for triathlon. For me, I did a race the summer after graduating from college that through which I was able to qualify for age group nationals. And I happened to qualify through my finish in that race. So it wasn't really anything that had been on my radar, but then once it was announced to me that I qualified for age group nationals, the competitor in me was like, oh, nationals, like that sounds cool. I'm gonna go do it. So I went down to Alabama that fall, and I raced in the age group nationals, and actually there happened to qualify for the age group world championships. I think I just squeaked in. I was probably actually like the last person to qualify for my age group. But the championships were in Beijing that next year. And I've always loved to travel. I hadn't had a lot of opportunity to do so until then, other than actually did a semester in London while I was in college. And I loved the travel I was able to do while I was over in Europe and just wanted to continue seeing the world. And so I thought, well, I've had this opportunity. I've always been interested in, seeing Beijing, China, and I'm going to do it. So I took the opportunity to go over there. And then I kind of, I knew enough through rowing in terms of putting together, speed versus longer endurance workouts. And I could sort of cobble somewhat of a training program together for myself. But I didn't really have a background in swimming, biking, or running. I just had enough to, I knew the basics of swimming to get through the water. Bike riding is bike riding. I mean, grew up riding bike. And running, I had played lacrosse growing up. And so I had, a little bit of running under my belt. So, but I was like, I'm paying the money to go over to Beijing. So I guess I should look into a coach. So I started working with a coach that over the course of that year. And that was really when I first got introduced to the world, I feel like, of competitive cycling and triathlon, because the coach was based out of Cadence Cycling in Philadelphia. So they had a pretty advanced group of athletes who in both cycling and triathlon for the area. And so I was like, it was the first time my eyes were opened up to the world of, the world circuit for triathlon and Ironman racing. I remember going to a training camp and asking not knowing who Chrissy Wellington was and having eyes roll in the back of their head that I didn't know. Legendary triathlete was. So I had a lot to learn. I really was just that girl who could sort of swim, bike, and run and love to be active and outside with people. And so it was really just that love of sport that kind of snowballed from there. I continued to just race as an age grouper while I was working in DC. And I didn't really have greater aspirations than that. But in 2013, as I was actually about to start business school, I qualified for the first time to race professionally as a triathlete. And so it was at that point that I had the first thought of, maybe this is something I want to pursue and see what I can do.
So how long were you continuing as an age grouper? So you in Washington, how long was that period? Was that for you?
I was
several years, I'm assuming, in terms of figuring out what you were good at.
I was in DC for 3 years. So I was racing as an age grouper for that time period and continued to work in environmental consulting and had really enjoyed my work in this space, but felt like I was really excited about all of the innovation in electric vehicles and sustainability coming out of the private sector. And so I knew I wanted to sort of pivot in my career, and I wasn't quite sure what that would look like. So that's what brought me to business school, was to explore, what I wanted my next step of my business career to look like. So didn't have triathlon as the next step at that point in my mind.
No, but it seems like it's a story very similar to queuing up to get your laptop back in Dartmouth campus. And here you are, let's go to business school, focus in, get the studies right, in order to pivot.
Yeah, exactly. It really was, I guess, history repeating itself in a certain sense. And so I guess how I was thinking about it at that point was just like, this is an interesting opportunity, but I'm investing in business school. I went through the corporate recruiting process. I did a corporate finance and strategy internship between my 2 years. And I sort of decided I wanted to continue focusing on that and see sort of that first year through. And at that point, come back around to, whether the triathlon opportunity was still kind of tugging at me at that point.
So, so you did your first year. Was the triathlon opportunity tugging at you?
It was. I think, after my summer internship, I felt like I kept coming back to triathlon for a few reasons. I think, like, first and foremost, it was just like, it seemed like such a unique opportunity. I realized that there weren't a lot of people who would just pick up triathlon from nothing the way that I had and be able to compete at the level I was already competing at after, a couple of years. And it was sort of like, I didn't want to be 70 and look back and wonder, what if? So I think that was kind of the first thing that kind of coming back to me. And then at the same time, I was fortunate to be surrounded by, a lot of, professors with decades of experience under their belts, a really supportive network of alumni who had attended school, the same school as I did, and had quite successful business careers. And so I really took it upon myself to talk to as many people as I could when I was making the decision to get their input on, knowing that there would be trade-offs, what their advice would be. And I felt like, I consistently heard from almost all the people I talked to that, my business degree and the experience I had in sort of like the corporate world wasn't going to go anywhere. The corporate world wasn't going anywhere. And this was an experience that, it wouldn't be open to me in a few years. It had sort of a limited time frame on it. And so I feel fortunate that friends, family, mentors, really, they really supported me to take the shot. And, I think helped me think through how I wanted to approach triathlon. For me, it was never like a long-term thing that I was going to do. I sort of approached it like I would a startup, if you will. I think for myself, I always knew it wouldn't be more than an Olympic cycle that I was going to be racing. But ultimately I thought, well, I'm going to do it for a year. I'm going to see if I have promising results. And if I do, then I'll do another year. And if I can make this a sustaining career and it's fulfilling and I'm continuing to improve, then I'll keep doing it. And if at any point I'm not, then I'll move on to the next chapter.
Right. Okay. All right. That's good. So you came at it with, I guess, a purpose in what you might want to achieve. You knew very early on what some of the, I suppose, the toll gates would be, and at reaching each of those moments, to be able to make a decision and say, okay, are we going forward? Are we pausing? What is it that's going to come next? And how did you come up with those? How did you know you were going to operate in that way?
Well, I have to say it was probably not as concrete in terms of specific goal points as maybe some people might have had. But I think for me, what I said for myself was, in the first year, if I could finish in the top 5 in sort of like the entry level of professional racing, then that would be good enough for me to, and if the coach I was working with felt like, and I felt like there was still more runway, there was still there, something there, then I would continue for another season. So that was, I would say, sort of the goal point. And I didn't try and make goals more than a year out, because it was just too far to know where I would be, you know?
Yeah. So you made this bold decision then to, did you finish your studies, or did you take a break? You finished the studies, and then you then had a decision point, a moment to either go and give this full-time triathlon a go, or to find, I'll say, a corporate job.
Mm-hmm.
And you,
yeah,
and you chose A.
Yes, exactly. And I would say for me, like, the decision point actually came at the start of my second year of business school, because I had basically three options open to me at that point. The first was to accept the offer from my summer internship, to go full time with them after I graduated. The second was to decline the offer and do the full-time recruiting, on-campus recruiting process for a different company. And then the third was triathlon. And so that really had to be the decision point, at the beginning of my second year. So I continued my studies, but I had made the decision about triathlon the fall of my second year. And so, you know, when I wasn't doing classes or training my second year, I also was just starting to have conversations with, you know, like brands who focus in triathlon and endurance sports, and, you know, any triathletes who would pro triathletes who would give me the time to just start thinking about what I needed to do to build up sponsorships and start building up my brand in a way that I could start, you know, getting financial support as an athlete after school.
Yeah. Great. And so basically the work started beforehand so that you were ready to go pro at the end of the studies.
Yeah, it sure did. And go ahead.
Oh, and how, and I mean, I think that's, again, good planning. And was that, you know, you mentioned the voices, the mentors, the friendship groups, etc. They were telling you or suggesting ways in doing that. And did that help?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, so I think it helped in a couple of ways. I think first was just in helping me to feel confident in making the decision, and that I guess the asset of my degree and the knowledge I built through that process was not gonna go away. And the second was in actually helping to, I think, equip me with the skill set to start thinking about my branding and selling myself as an athlete and building my business as an athlete, kind of through the lens of the classes I was taking. For instance, I took an entrepreneurial sales class my second year, and through that was always, you know, as we were thinking about new concepts and new like selling strategies, I was always thinking about, you know, how can I tie this back to me? Like, how do I think about, you know, like what I want, like a catchphrase for Sarah Alexander to be, or, you know, how do I want to integrate this in my website and social media that I would be kind of like building up. Helped on a couple levels for sure.
Yeah, that's brilliant. So, so I'll ask one in terms of that first. So you turn pro. What is a pro triathlete?
That is a good question, because I think there are a couple different types of pro triathletes. And this was something I didn't realize, I would say, until I was really thinking about taking the step. And I remember my coach kind of explaining to me, the first type of pro triathlete out there is someone who is just a really strong athlete, and they want to keep pushing themselves and competing against the best field that they can. And for them, that means racing at the professional level, but it's not their full-time job. They have a day job, and it's just kind of something that they do at a very high level because they're just a very high athletic performer. So that's the first type. And then the second is someone that I think fits the more, prototypical image that we would have in our mind of a pro athlete. It's their full-time job. And so everything in their lives kind of circles around optimizing performance on race day. And I think, and I say optimizing performance on race day because, especially when you're getting started as a pro triathlete, there's a little bit of like a chicken and egg scenario in which you need to build your brand and be building up sponsors to help, support your journey. But you first need the results to be able to have the substance that sponsors will ultimately need there to be. And so that's really the first, I think it's like the first level of what needs to be there if you're going to be taking this full-time professional triathlete approach. Then comes the new element of social media influence, and which is becoming more and more important as a percentage of your focus as an athlete these days.
Yeah, more important in what way?
I think in many ways, having results is not enough as a pro athlete anymore, especially with to what we were talking about before, how connected we're becoming with social media and all of the different digital platforms. Certainly results have to be there, but I think people are also looking for more of a story and someone they can relate to, and brands are really looking for those kind of like authentic connections that they can leverage.
It is amazing how for athletes that's a shift. It's almost your job is the athletic, is the sport, but the expectation from communities, from corporate or sponsors is certainly changing. And so I guess coming into to you think of, you set yourself the goal for the first year, a couple of years. So how did the goals go, and how long were you then a pro athlete for?
So in total, I raced full time for about 4.5 years. And I think, I went in with the goal of trying to qualify for the Olympics, as many do. And so at the end of the day, I fell short of that. But I think along the way there, for those 4 years, I continued to hit checkpoints that were goals along the way for me. So that included, podiums at world circuit races, continuing to get starts at higher level and higher caliber races on the world circuit, because there's sort of a spectrum of difficulty of races, and you have to have a certain track record and have built up a number of points to get starts there. So I think, ultimately I was never able to have the Olympic experience, unfortunately, but, I think a lot of the individual race performances along the way were very meaningful to me. And for me, being 60th in the world was more of an accomplishment than I think I thought I could achieve coming in. When I started, I had people telling me, you are going to be going up against, Olympic runners and swimmers. There's no way you'll even podium at like a first level race, let alone be top 100, knocking on top 50 in the world. So It's definitely, I think, an achievement that I hold on to and am proud of, especially just knowing where I started from. So
absolutely, I think it's a fantastic achievement. It really is. So, if we shift a bit to that, this moment, then. So you said it's 4.5 years. What was the beginning? What made you realize this is coming to an end? What started to happen?
yeah, so I mean, I think, as I mentioned, I had sort of set an Olympic cycle as generally the amount of time that I saw myself in the sport, unless something really significant changed or I had just such tremendous success that I wasn't going to walk away from the sport at that point. So around, and I think that by 2019, I knew that I wasn't going to make the Olympics, and I was already starting to think that end of 2020 would be when I would, I guess, move on to the next pursuit, and kind of come back to the business world. And I think, as the pandemic did for many, it sort of accelerated that transition for me. I was planning in 2020 to race the Ironman distance, actually, and was targeting the Kona World Championships. And so when everything kind of like shut down in March, I continued to train for a couple months at that point, but at that point started to just see the writing on the wall that I didn't think that Kona was going to happen, and it seemed like it was the right time to really start doubling down on what the next chapter would look like for me.
Yeah, and what was that then? What did doubling down look like? Did it mean no longer getting up at 4 a.m. or what was the beginning for you?
Well, first it meant a couple meltdowns on the side of the road on the phone to my husband. But I think then for me, I continued to train in an unchanged way through April and May, but at the same time sort of took a stepwise process of thinking through what I wanted to pursue next. And for me, what that looked like was, thinking back on, through business school and my first job, what were the things that I had enjoyed in the work that I had done? What were aspects that I knew weren't a good fit with my personality? And I started, honestly, I went on LinkedIn and I just started looking up at different job postings to see, what was even available. And just, I actually started kind of pie in the sky, like any job that just looked amazing, even if it wouldn't be my next job, like where I would maybe want to be one day. For me, that was often these sort of like senior leadership, very like strategic roles. And as I kind of like then moved back from there, one of the core requirements that kept coming up, or not necessarily a requirement, but a preferred prerequisite, was to have worked in management consulting, which, to be honest, I really hadn't given a lot of consideration to management consulting in the past, because to a certain extent, when I was in B school, like that was just like what everyone wanted to do. And for the most part, it was like they were doing it because it was the like elite thing to do, and you would do it for a couple of years, whether you liked it or not, and go on to the next thing. And for me, that's just never been how I operate. For me, like it needs to be like, I need to do something because I feel invested in it and I feel like it's a true fit. And so, but as I was looking at these job descriptions, I kept seeing management consulting come up, and I thought, well, I have a lot of friends who are in management consulting or were in consulting right after school. So I started, having some conversations with them. And, perusing, different consultancies, websites. And as I was speaking to them and learning more about the role, I realized like, actually, this is a great fit for me. It's fast paced. It's a fairly intense environment, which I knew those are two things that I wanted. And there's just inherent variety in the job description. And that's something I didn't feel ready to commit to a particular industry, sub-industry brand, I still felt like I had enough breadth of interest that this was actually the perfect role for me. So at that point, I then started doing more specific research and more focused networking within that industry.
That is an amazing way of describing the process. I'd say, well done for doing that, because what I hear, which is fascinating, is throughout your career, the story that we've gone through, you have these moments where you create this vision for yourself, whether it turns out to be realistic or not in hindsight. At the moment, you seem to create a very colorful, a very vivid view as to, well, this is where I want to be, this is where I want to go, be it ice skating, be it rowing, be it triathlon. And now here you create that vision, and as we keep going, you demonstrate then you are prepared to go through the steps, whatever it takes in many ways, in order to make that vision a reality.
Yes.
So
I very much.
And it sounds like you went through a similar process.
Totally. I'm a big believer of, if you surround yourself by great people, you put into place a very systematic, thoughtful process, then you put in the work to execute it day in and day out. I think that people can achieve much more than they think with those three elements in place.
Yeah, great things can happen. And that's
absolutely.
a good belief. And so you started doing more specific research, and you networking differently. And again, so your intention, I suppose you're not there in necessarily the big vision that you have, but the step one was to get yourself into consulting. How's that going for you?
Oh, it's been an amazing experience thus far. I have to say, basically in July of 2020, I made the decision to just stop training. And I essentially made my full-time job preparing for interviews for consulting, which for anyone who has been through the case interview process, I think can relate to just what a learning curve there is with that. But I started, I was fortunate to receive an offer to join Boston Consulting Group in February of 2021. So I'm actually just almost at my 1 year anniversary here. And time flies. It really does. But it's been an amazing experience thus far. And I think has really met my expectations. For me, to what I mentioned, it was really important to feel like the work that I was doing was having a meaningful impact on my community and the world more broadly. And I think I've primarily been working in the consumer sector thus far in my time at BCG. But it's been pretty neat to see, I think, all the innovation coming in the area, starting to inch my way, we'll see, but hopefully towards the intersection of sustainability and consumer. And I think this is just a very burgeoning area as consumers are becoming more aware of the impact that our consumption has on the world. And companies realizing that this embracing sustainability can be a win-win. And that's what excited me about environmental studies back in college, was just this, what's good for the environment and helps our planet can also be the smart business decision. That's really exciting to me. So I'm excited to be, working at a company that is really invested in helping companies make that transition. And so we'll see how things evolve, but it's been a tremendous experience thus far. Great people, really great culture. And to what I was saying before, I think that's like such a core piece of, being able to do great things. So.
That's wonderful. I think in that last description there of working at BCG, you just described what it was like to be in the rowing boat back at Dartmouth.
Yeah,
totally. With the people, with that culture, with that environment. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Listen, I think that's great. Now, so I do have to ask, you've interspersed your life so far with these great focuses on sport and moving forward. Which sport is next?
Well, I still text with one of my triathlon coaches. He texts me a picture of the open road, and we'll usually say 4-hour endurance ride. And I text him a picture of my Excel worksheet, and I say 4-hour Excel. So yeah, I've been joking that I'm in a PowerPoint and Excel block right now. But we'll see. I think for me, as I've made the transition to consulting, I think something that I've realized was, just movement is just like a part of who I am. It's a really important part of my life. But right now I'm really enjoying being able to go out for a run because I want to, or hop on my bike because I want to, and go fast or slow because I want to. And, like when you're a professional athlete, I think, a lot of my friends would be like, oh, it's so great. You just get to ride your bike all day. And yes, that is great. And it's something I think I can appreciate what I had through that experience even more now when I'm, at my desk, like 12 hours a day. But, it also is your job. And there are definitely times that the joy might not be there in the way that you always want it to be. And so I think for me, I am enjoying being able to run as much as I want right now. And my husband really likes just running like crazy long distances and is thinking about doing a marathon. And that was one of the things I haven't run a marathon yet, because I didn't end up racing an Ironman. So I don't know, I'm toying around with the idea, but it also feels very long. So we'll see.
Well, what I would say is, so how you were planning to do Kona or to do an Ironman. I can tell you that it is easier to do a marathon without having doing the swim and the bike beforehand. So this should be quite easy.
It does seem logical.
That's right. You don't need such a long warm up of 5, 6, 8 hours of activity before you do a marathon. I think that it is interesting though, thinking about that length of time, and just when you reflect back or you look back, what did you sacrifice? Do you feel you sacrificed anything in your life and you missed out on? Does anything come to mind there?
It's a good question. One of our great American triathletes, Gwen Jorgensen, of course, people used to ask her. I remember hearing people ask her this in interviews, and her saying, everyone's talking about sacrifice, but I think about it as investment. And I think for me, that's really what it's felt as I look back. I think, of course, life making choices in life just like necessitates trade-offs. Like to choose one thing, you do not choose another. And I definitely remember, you know, in business school, as I was thinking about like being a professional athlete out of business school and talking to my husband, like this actually has like tangible impacts on like what the timing of a family would look like for us, which is something that we want. And I mean, fortunately, I don't think that for me it will be an either or. But you know, I think like when working women would like come in high school and talk to us about like the glass ceiling and trade-offs that women need to think about that maybe men don't need to think about in the same way. That became very real to me as a professional athlete, where, you know, legitimately, like you cannot do your job if you are 8 months pregnant. So I think I guess I've been fortunate in that I don't feel like I've necessarily had to give anything up at this point, but there have certainly been trade-offs in terms of like not starting a family yet, or like working for people who are younger than me at BCG right now. You know, I think for some people that would be really hard. For me, I feel like I'm really grateful for the opportunities I've had. And for the years that I didn't have in like the corporate world, I had just like tremendous experiences that not a lot of people get to have. So for me, I always hold on to like what I had and the things that make me unique and that I can bring to the table, and that I've been blessed with, as opposed to, you know, thinking about what I've had to give up, and being grateful that I don't feel like I've had to give anything up, because I know that there are other people who wouldn't say they're in the same position. So
that's great. Look, and look, I've got one more question for you. When you look back at your sporting careers, a triathlon or sporting careers, I would say. When you look at the job that you're doing today, so you're going to go into the office or you're going to be working tomorrow. What are the top skills that you think you're bringing from those sporting experiences into what you're going to be doing tomorrow?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think there's any number of things, but we'll do in good consulting fashion. I'll do a top 3.
That's good.
So I think the first thing that I definitely bring on a day-to-day basis is just, I would say, resilience, and the ability to not just bounce back from mistakes or failure, however you want to define them, but like bounce forward and really like embrace those as learning opportunities to be better. I think that was just something that was so critical to me as an athlete in all 3 sports that I did. And I think it's definitely something, especially in this first year, this new job, like learning all the time, like I've had to be comfortable and really embrace, like, it's okay if I make a mistake, I communicate through it, I learn the lesson, and I'm better for it. And I feel fortunate that I think BCG is just, the teams that I've been on have had a great culture around that, you know, we're all there to learn. So resiliency would be the first. I think the second would be just like a team-oriented mindset. And for me, that looks like, you know, before signing off at night, if I see a teammate is still online, you know, checking in to ask if they need help, if there's anything I can support with. And also, you know, like realizing that like this job is about our team helping our clients succeed. It's not about me being the star, you know, so you know, realizing like when is the time to step up and when is it time to step back and let someone else like really shine and support them. So teamwork, I guess, would be second. And then I would say third is just, I guess, like the discipline that I learned as an athlete. I think that the time management, the skill oriented mindset of just like building the fundamental skills and drilling the skills to become great, is something that I guess it remains yet to be seen if that will help me succeed. But it has been a foolproof approach in the past. So I'm hoping that it will be the same in consulting as well.
Absolutely.
So I guess,
Thank you for
versus
sharing that.
resilience. Yeah, second team oriented, and then third is, I guess, skill focus.
That's it. Well, I think that's awesome, and you've demonstrated time and time again. You started behind the pack many times,
Yes.
with something that's not to your advantage, and you've caught up and overtaken most along that journey. So I think you have a great path ahead of you there, Sarah. This is wonderful.
Thank you.
It's great that you take the time to share your story today. Really appreciate that, and I've enjoyed this conversation. So thanks very much.
Same. Yeah. Thanks for having me. And I love what you're doing. And I think there's a bigger network than we think of athletes out there who I know want to support one another. And I've had a lot of people help me. And so I'm happy to pay it forward however I can.
Thank you. And look, listen, I really do. I know I actually caught with Kay Dawson last week.
I was going to ask how you know Kay.
Yeah. So, well, Kay and I go way back. In fact, I want to say 20 years. Is that too much? I don't think it is. What year are you in? 22. Yeah. So I'm going to say 20 years. So Kay and I were at GE together, GE Capital together, back in the UK. Yeah. And so she was in people and culture, and I was on one of their entry European leadership programs, being flown around the world for a few months at a time. Amazing. And so Kenneth, we had a great time, partying, clubbing, mostly dancing together.
Love it.
And that's it. So she's a great friend. She's a really good friend. And as I started telling her what I'm looking to do with Second Wind and helping athletes finance, she's like, oh my gosh, why did it take you so long to come up with this?
Yeah.
It's like, you're right. Okay. And so that's it. So we get on the air. I was chatting with her just a couple of weeks ago, last week, in fact. And she's doing great. And she was saying, so have you caught up with Sarah? And I said, we nearly caught up.
If she hadn't stood me up last week.
yeah, which is all good. I've been there, and as I was saying in my job, so I found myself in strategy, and I've been working some enjoyable moments with BCG as a specific company.
Yeah.
So I know the way they are getting you to think. So this is and I would say it's been, I would say it's been super useful for me, working with the likes of BCG, but then bringing that with my sporting experiences. And I'm a marketing major, really. I go back to university. So I really would say it is interesting listening to you, how you had to learn to build your brand and talk about you as you entered into full-time triathlon. And I'm going to say that's a skill that most people do not have. And your ability to pick that up and keep it with you, recognize you are a brand in BCG, socially, whatever it might be, just in your career.
Yeah.
That's gonna make a whole world of difference.
Yeah, it's true. It's definitely like an interesting lens when you start thinking about like the brand of you. It's sometimes, and I feel like you can probably relate to this. Like, as I was thinking about going through my marketing classes at Booth and whatnot, it's so much easier I feel like, to apply like marketing principles and strategy for like someone else than yourself. It's tough, but I think, it's I've found it to be helpful. But yeah, it's super interesting.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Oh, it is. It is. And so look, in terms of next steps, what I will do, uh, the idea is for me to launch the podcast series in about 2 weeks or later this month.
Awesome.
And there'll be a series of stories similar to this one from athletes around the world on look, the 5 points, their story and the experiences. So I've spoken to maybe 6 or 7 folks so far, and what I'll do is I was thinking, oh, I should do a Netflix and just do a binge. Boom, they're all live. But I think
Yeah.
I'll release them. I'll release them out bit by bit, just to save people having to listen to it all and my voice so often. But I'll just release it through. But I'll share it with you, and I'd love to keep in contact, especially as I meet more athletes who are at that point of transition. They're going through it,
Yeah.
and as I help guys with their career advice and career journeys. And so there are a couple of people who are in their first, second jobs, and I know they have interests in that next role. So anyone certainly from a consulting, I'll certainly, if you
Yeah.
don't mind, I'll maybe connect you guys as well.
Yeah, please do. If there's anything you can do to help you all, and just to be a resource for any of the folks you're working with, you know where to find me. So I'm more than happy.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. So thank you very, very much for your time. You have a great evening.
Thank you. You too. Look forward to being in touch. All right.
Yeah. All right. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.